My name's Ryan Kelley. I'm the lead talent acquisition specialist for General Atomics Aeronautical Systems here in Poway, California. I first entered the workforce in 1999, right before Y2K and right in the middle of, I guess, the upswing of the dot-com boom, if I recall. I think those are probably the two things I associate most with when I entered the workforce.
Right. What's General Atomics do?
General Atomics is a defense contractor, and the Aeronautical Systems Division is the most prominent producer of medium altitude, long endurance drones. So our most notable customers are the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force, and our most notable product is the Predator drone that you've probably heard about, that's in use and has been in use frequently in Afghanistan and the Middle East.
So do most of the people that work in your organization require some sort of clearance just to be able to work for General Atomics?
Only if you actually see the schematics of the aircraft. So anyone in manufacturing, anyone in engineering require a secret clearance. For what I do there, no, it doesn't. It's not required that I have one.
Okay. So you entered the workforce in 1999. What did you do when you first entered?
Well, I actually had a degree in music. So at that point in time, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. So I was talking to my dad, and he had a degree in theater. And he said, well, I got into sales. You should look into sales. So I looked into sales, and I found a job as a recruiter, selling, third-party recruiting services. So
okay.
My job was to go out, and I was focusing in the IT sector. So I was specializing in the placement of software development professionals, software engineers, into companies that were hiring software engineers. So we'd call, make our pitch. They would engage with us, and then we'd go out and try to find them whatever engineers they were looking for with whatever skill sets. And once we found the engineer, we'd place them into the company. We'd get a commission.
Okay. Now,
so
people that you go ahead.
So I've been doing basically the same thing for 20 years, although I'm no longer on part of a third-party organization. I'm an internal recruiter for General Atomics, but I recruit engineers and project managers for my company, and I don't get a commission, unfortunately. I get a salary.
I bet you'd like to get a commission, wouldn't you?
Yeah, some days. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So when you entered as this third-party provider, was your product or was it a product or service that you were providing to the community that you service?
It was a service, yeah, recruiting services. Yep.
So you were essentially a recruiter for other companies, essentially.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And in that role, did you get a commission?
That role, I got a commission, yeah.
Okay. And what were the requirements, since you were a music major? Were there any specific requirements of you to get that job, or just you had a great personality?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the advertisement said bachelor's degree preferred, but no experience required. So, I went and I interviewed, and they liked what I had to offer, as far as experience and personality. And so they hired me, but I worked alongside a couple other people that didn't have degrees, but they had other types of sales experience, if I recall.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So in that role, what was the workplace like? The office, the environment, the culture, things like that. What was the workplace like that you worked in?
Well, it was very much a bullpen, what we call bullpen environment. So a lot of people in cubes, and I would say lower cube walls, so everyone could hear what everyone was doing. But it was very much a phone-based environment, so almost like a telemarketing kind of environment.
Gotcha.
But this was before everyone had their own computers and email addresses and cell phones. So I had a phone at my desk, index cards, and a filing cabinet, and that's how we worked. So we didn't get emails. We didn't have our own email accounts. None of us had our own computers. Only the receptionist had a computer. So it was we were probably a little bit behind the curve as far as technology.
Right.
I'm sure academia and high technology companies had their own computers and everyone had their own email addresses. But at that point in time, it was not the norm for my industry and many others.
So really it was a card index and a telephone and you get your job done, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
So if we wanted to, our product were candidates. So if we wanted to submit a candidate via resume, we would have to take the candidate's resume, a hard copy, cut out the basic meat of the resume, and then we would tape it to a piece of our letterhead, photocopy it, and then fax it to the customer that wanted to see the candidate's resume. So it was very manual, and very paper driven.
I'll be darned. And that's only 21 years ago.
Yeah. Yep. And I was at that company for about 6 months, and I got a job at another company from a friend. And when I got a job there, I had my own computer, I had my own email address, and I had my own pager. So that was 2000. But I remember all of that equipment was new. So they had just started, adopting that type of technology. So it was, by the year 2000, it was pretty common for an office worker to have their own email address, their own computer, right. And it was a desktop. Nobody had laptops. Very few people had laptops. Everyone was working on desktops. And the good thing is you couldn't take your work home with you. But I think in those days, they expected you to work longer hours. And as a matter of fact, that second company I worked for that I'm referring to got involved in a pretty big class action lawsuit for unpaid overtime. So thousands and thousands of people.
Was your job considered an exempt or non-exempt job?
It was exempt. And so even though we didn't really make a lot of decisions or have, typical exempt job responsibilities, it was an exempt job, but they were held liable for millions and millions of dollars of unpaid overtime, which all of us received checks for. And the longer you had been with a company, the bigger the check you got. So that was probably one of the first things I realized that was sort of changing in the workforce. Is a lot of companies at that time around the turn of the century were dealing with these class action lawsuits due to unpaid overtime for, what they called exempt employees. But you could probably make an argument for non-exempt. And obviously in the courts, the attorneys did so and won. So there was a lot of companies, I think, taking advantage of younger professionals at the time. And that was the first thing I remember that started changing in the workforce. Because after that, they started kicking us out of the office after 8.5, 9 hours. Go home, no FaceTime. We just, they didn't want us just sitting around because it looked good if you were in the office early and there late. First in, last out looked like you were going to get promoted to first. So it was a lot of FaceTime and not a lot of productive time,
And so it was more about what the boss saw as opposed to what you were delivering in terms of content.
Yeah.
Has the law changed relative to exempt and non-exempt classifications?
It changes every year. But so, that, and this was before we were on commission. Once they went through that lawsuit, and then we all actually went on commission. Before, we would get a pooled bonus, and whoever worked the least or whoever worked the most would get the same bonus depending on how long they'd been there. It wasn't based on individual production, so they flipped that, moved more towards individual production, and it became more incentive based. And then at that point, obviously the whole compensation structure changed. So it was really, the conversation kind of died around, how many hours you're putting in. It became more numbers driven and more metrics driven. And so they began to care less about who was in the office the longest, but it was more about who produced the most.
Now, when they reclassified you as salesman, did it also change your classification relative to exempt and non-exempt?
Well, as I said, we were exempt the whole time.
Okay.
But the only way they could make us exempt, and I think really be in compliance with the law, was to put us on commission.
Gotcha.
Put individual incentive.
So how about the management style in that company, the one that you were with, where they changed their style of paying you? How was the management style at that point in time?
Yeah, they became much more. It was for years the company was relatively young and ran by mostly all men. And so as the company aged, people started to get married and have families. And so it became less of a sweatshop. You know, that's probably the best way to describe it. They
Wow.
became more accommodating for personal needs and family needs, and you know, just more accommodating overall. And obviously, the company had to go through some diversity initiatives to get more women into managerial roles and things like that.
Right.
In the course of the 4 years I was there, it changed quite a bit. Yeah, but more women got promoted into managerial roles, director roles, executive roles. But when I first started there, it was all the leadership was men.
Now, was that driven by any kind of an affirmative action program?
No, I think they just realized that, you know, they'd been through enough lawsuits, whether it was for the unpaid overtime or sexual harassment or, you know, just, you know, employee satisfaction surveys. People were just disengaged. I think they realized they had to change a little bit,
Okay.
and get with the times. But that was really about the time that, you know, that really started. I mean, that all kickstarted, you know, in the 80s, 90s. But by the time, you know, the new century rolled around, if you weren't with the times and embracing this stuff, you just weren't an attractive place for women to want to go to work. And some of our best salespeople had always been women, and so it was just natural that they need to, you know, foster their growth into director and executive roles, at, you know,
Gotcha.
above and beyond, you know, being productive salespeople. So that was just kind of a natural evolution. They were one of the last firms to embrace it that was their size, but you know, better later than never, I suppose.
Right. How long were you there?
4 years.
4 years. And did
Yeah.
you make progression? Did you progress up the ladder, or was it the same
Yeah.
position the whole 4 years?
No, I progressed into a managerial role, and that's actually how I ended up in San Diego. Is they promoted me to manage a sales territory down here.
Okay. Okay. So when you got promoted to a manager, were there expectations in terms of how you should manage your organization in terms of style and, you know, leadership skills, and how you should treat your employees? Was there any guidelines there?
No, and there was a lot of different approaches. We had some really good managers, and we had some really bad managers. I mean, they sent them to training, leadership training, and some, you know, some people benefited from that. Some people, it just didn't really quite sink in. So it was a bit of Wendy and I always refer it to, you know, the frat house, you know, just because it was just a lot of very young, successful men. And as I said, as the company matured and people got older, it became a more tolerable place to work. But you had some really bad managers, and you had some really good managers, but the bad ones seemed to get weeded out. They just didn't really care about the others' personal growth and really engaging with their employees and challenging people instead of, you know, chastising people and sort of bullying people. It really did take a turn, you know, in the 4 years that I was there for the better.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. What caused you to leave that company?
My manager. So, yeah.
The very issue that you were talking about, right?
Yeah. And I'd worked for 3 different people prior to that, but due to a number of reasons, another person took over our district, and we just didn't really see eye to eye. And I'd been in conversations with another company about what I could bring to the table for them. So I moved on after a little more than 4 years. But I did learn a lot there, and you know, it set me on a path of success, I think, for the rest of my career.
Right. So now you're in San Diego and you're going to another company. What was the company you went to?
It was called, well, it was another staffing firm. It was called Becker Executive Search.
Okay.
And I was there for about 3 years, doing similar stuff. I was recruiting accounting and finance professionals for corporate finance organizations.
Okay.
So we would recruit CPAs, accountants, auditors, controllers, finance professionals, you know, FP&A types. And so that was a good market to be in. That was right around the time Sarbanes-Oxley had been rolled out. And so all companies were pouring, you know, millions and millions of dollars into internal controls, internal audits.
Absolutely.
So that was a hot market to be in. And that was a lot of fun. It was a little boutique firm, and I worked directly for the owner, and ultimately he sold the company. And I'd gotten another really good offer to move on to another company after that I was at for about 2 years. And then the recession hit in 2008. And a lot of people in my industry lost their jobs. I lost mine in 2009. And so at that point is when I thought I need to find something with more stability. It can't be sales or commission based. And so after about 8 or 9 months of searching, I ended up at LPL Financial.
Okay.
As an internal recruiter, and I took a huge pay cut, but it was setting me on the path of more stability. And I'd been thinking I wanted to get more on the human resources side versus just the personnel augmentation side. And I was there for 6 years, and again, great company, learned a ton, and I got lured out of there after I felt I'd learned everything I could learn. And but yeah.
Now, while you were there, did you see a difference again in the style of management and other things that would say the workplace was better, worse, or the same as what you'd come from?
I actually, witnessed quite a bit there. I witnessed the company offshore their very first batch of employees. There were about 200 people that were doing data entry type work, but some had been employed, at the company since the 80s, 20 years plus. And they had very, I guess you could say they were, definitely well above minimum wage, living wage type work for San Diego. And unfortunately they chose to offshore about 200 jobs. This was around 2011, 2012. And that was sad. All of our competitors, had all started offshoring positions like that. And the concern was in the industry that, when you offshore something like that, it's, can it be trusted? It's a financial organization.
Right.
You need obviously a lot of accuracy in data, entry and data management. And so we were one of the last firms to go through it. And that was one of the things that we used to brag about when recruiting people, is that, we're one of the only financial services firms of our size in the U.S. that, has all of its operations, within the U.S. And so unfortunately that wasn't going to be one of our pitch lines anymore, in recruiting people to the organization. But, it was a public company. I was there when they went through their IPO. Which they had sat on for years because of the recession. So,
and you're frozen.
Oh, really?
Wow. No, you're back. What kind of positions were outsourced overseas?
It was like data entry.
Data entry. Okay.
Yeah, so back office stuff.
It wasn't the salesman or the financial analyst that did the work with the customers. No.
Okay. All back office stuff. Yeah, a lot of quality control and sort of data entry type jobs.
Okay. Interesting.
So that was the first. Yeah, that was the first time I'd witnessed that, and unfortunately, that's been a big trend in the U.S. for whether it's been manufacturing or customer service or technology jobs. There's been a big trend in outsourcing for over 20 years now, more than that. And that was the first time I dealt with it firsthand.
What kind of an impact did that have on LPL when they did that? What were the reverberations throughout the organization?
It was a little bit of a morale killer. I think everyone kind of thought at that point that nobody's job was safe, that everybody's job could be looked at to be outsourced. Again, public company, they had, shareholders now, and they had to produce. So it became a much more tightly managed organization financially. And so they were really trying to squeeze every drop. And so unfortunately that trend continued. They ended up offshoring, I don't know, a couple hundred more jobs after that. And then it sort of leveled out. They got to a point where they realized there was just certain things that, that couldn't be outsourced, whether it had to do with the customer's preferences or regulatory concerns or just security concerns. So they went through their bout of offshoring, and then it leveled out. But yeah, it impacted morale negatively. for some time, but then things rebounded.
Now, do you know if they subsequently brought any of that back to the U.S. Or is the stuff that was outsourced stayed there?
I'm pretty sure it probably it
I
stayed there. There was no maybe a few small things here and there, but most companies have outsourced those types of jobs and kept them
Okay.
outsourced. And our outsourced partner was in India.
Okay. And that
and
was
so
all
there was
that was all driven by the cost of labor being significantly lower in India, right?
significantly lower.
Yeah.
Significantly lower, yeah. There was we would pay someone maybe $22 an hour, and then in India we could pay them $2 an hour.
Wow.
So
Wow.
yeah,
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, LPL as a management company, how did you see them as their management style? Were they good to their employees in terms of developing the people and their practices and their human resources supportive individuals?
Yeah. They took their lumps too. They'd gone through some growing pains. When I got a job there, the HR department that I worked in had a pretty bad reputation. They were known as kind of a sweatshop. So we got some new HR leadership, and she got us a seat at the table. She was a direct report of the CEO. He was a big fan of hers, and she led us through a really high period of growth. But the company started focusing more on succession planning and performance reviews and performance enhancement and setting goals for employees and promoting from within and internal mobility. And so all these things really came to the forefront during her tenure, and she's still there. The chief human resource officer. She was a very good leader, had the ear of the CEO and the board, and could get funding and the backing to do some of these things.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. So you would say they evolved towards more of a professional management organization then?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that was over the course of the 6 years you were there?
6 years. Yeah. Yeah. It went from not having a great reputation, lots of disgruntled employees, again, through the time where we had to outsource people or offshore people through the IPO. So a lot of bumps along the way, but by the time I'd left, I could definitely say it was a world-class HR organization and a world-class, financial services organization too.
Right. Now, how long have they been here in the Southern California area, or is this where they started?
30 years. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Linsco was one company and Private Ledger was another. And one was in Boston, the other was in San Diego, and they merged, I want to say in the early 80s.
Okay.
And they've had a presence in San Diego since the late 70s, early 80s.
Okay. So they've been around a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, did you work in their
Correct.
large facility here that now houses over 2,000 employees?
Yeah. Right there, right off of the 805.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, I think I told you my daughter works there, and she just loves it. She thinks it's a wonderful place to work. So obviously the reputation you've talked about has evolved to a great place to work.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a great place to work.
So what caused you to leave LPL and go from there?
Well, I got lured to go work at HP, Hewlett Packard.
Uh-huh.
And so that the company was going through a lot of transition. I didn't stay there long. That they had just gone through divesting their consulting business, HP Enterprise.
Right.
And I was working for HP, the printer and PC division.
Okay.
But the company, there was the person I was reporting to was in the UK. The job I took wasn't really quite how they described it. It just wasn't really the right fit. There were a lot of rumors swirling that they were going to be leaving San Diego and closing their Rancho Bernardo campus. So I made the move to General Atomics at that time.
Were you still in the recruiting role at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was doing executive recruiting at the last couple of years at LPL, and then I transitioned to executive recruiting at HP.
Okay, when you say executive recruiting, is that like everybody that's like a vice president above?
Director or above, yeah.
Okay, good. Now, the people that you recruited, what were the skill sets and the knowledge that you were looking for in folks at that kind of level?
All across the company. So whether they were operations, finance, R&D, sales, you name it. So
Okay.
yeah, across the whole organization. So any director level role or above are positions that we would tackle.
Okay. And did they all, at that point, at that level, did they all require to have some form of college degree?
Yeah, a lot of them did. You had to. I mean, at those levels, absolutely. So most people had their MBA. Depending on the role, if they were on the R&D side or the product development side, they would have PhDs.
Oh, wow. Now,
Yeah.
were they the type of company that would recruit from the top 10 B schools? Because I know some firms used to do that. It was like if you didn't go to Harvard or Yale or Berkeley or something like that, then you weren't on our radar screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So even when I was at LPL, the CFO there was a big fan of, top 10 MBA schools.
Right.
So he wanted to see those types of resumes. And then at HP as well, they were big fans of, especially in finance oriented positions or, management operations type positions. They wanted a top tier MBA. That was their strong preference.
That's very interesting. Now, did you see anything in terms of along the way here, change in the way of ethical behavior or laws that demanded more of an ethical concern when making business decisions? Have you encountered that along the way?
Yeah, I mean, in some capacities, I can say when I first started the workforce, sexual harassment, workplace harassment, workplace bullying was a big thing still. At the companies I worked for, and I guarantee any place I've worked, nobody can get away with that stuff anymore. It's just, I don't call them ambulance chasers, but there are a lot of lawyers out there that take on these cases of, from plaintiffs who have issues with the workplace. And, in California, we are very much pro employee. Yeah. And so if you have compelling documentation or a case of harassment or wrongful termination, it's more than likely going to land in the plaintiff's favor. So companies have done a ton of mitigation, with just more training, more human resource outreach, giving, hotlines, employee hotlines for people to call, whether it's, for those things I mentioned or ethical business practice. We have a hotline for that type of thing at General Atomics that, if you sense anything unusual, there's a whistleblower hotline, and you can call that hotline for any of the things I just mentioned, whether it's unethical business practices, workplace harassment, any of that stuff, retaliation. So you
had mentioned at LPL, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Can you kind of expand on what that was and why that demanded the requirement and recruitment of so many accountants?
Yeah. So around 2001, Arthur Andersen was a large public accounting firm. They used to be the Big Five. I think they're down to 4 now. That was the primary or chief auditor for, not chief auditor, but the primary auditor of Enron, which was a huge global energy company based in Texas. And Enron, over the period of a couple of years, started fudging their financials, their earnings, and Arthur Andersen.
I lost you, Brian. I lost you. There, your picture went off for a second.
Sorry. So yeah, Arthur Andersen, had certified these financials for a number of years, and basically Enron went down, Arthur Andersen went down. So after that, the law stated Sarbanes and Oxley were 2 senators, I believe.
Okay.
Or two people in the House of Representatives, but they penned the bill that all financials had to be signed and certified by the chief financial officers, and they had to have extensive documentation verifying the finances, so audited financials. And so it just became much more stringent. And so every company went out to hire these, internal control professionals or internal audit professionals to make sure that all of the processes are documented and
Gotcha.
that there's checks and balances so that, whoever signs payroll can't be the same person that signs payables or, that sort of thing.
Right.
So
right.
just kind of segregation of duties, verifying and documenting processes just to make sure that, when a company's financials are released, that the investor can be assured that the company's not cooking the books, essentially.
Right. I remember
Yeah.
the nickname for the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was the Accountants Full Employment Act.
Yes, that's absolutely true. Anyone that had an accounting degree, any kind of internal audit experience, any kind of, even if it was just, bookkeeping experience, you could find a job doing that,
Right.
that kind of, internal controls and documentation. I mean, it was
That's
just
interesting.
a huge thing. And it's still a big deal. I mean, it's still very much law of the land. And
Yeah.
it's gone through a lot of modifications, but it still very much drives business at publicly traded companies. But it's good because as a shareholder or as a potential purchaser of stock, you can be assured that there's a lot less fraud going on.
Right. Now, have any of the companies you worked with, either past or current, had to comply with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act?
I've not had, they probably all have, not LPL because most of their work is domestic, but HP's certainly probably had to deal with that. And so is GA, General Atomics, because we've sold aircraft to, various foreign governments.
Right.
But I don't have a lot of experience in that space. I've not had to hire too many people that have dealt with that, but we certainly have training at GA on an annual or every other year basis, on all the new regulations around that. So I have to be aware of it, and they tell us what to keep our eyes out for, but I don't have a lot of exposure in that space.
I'll give you a quick anecdotal story that I had to deal with. I was responsible for Baskin-Robbins and Dunkin' Donuts worldwide, and we had operations in Moscow. And we were a joint venture partner with our Baskin-Robbins organization in Moscow. And I got a call, not personally, but through my folks, that the crime syndicate there wanted us to pay money for protection. And if they didn't pay money for protection, they were going to blow up one of our restaurants. Well, it was against the law for us to make those payments because of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Sure.
And they waited till one night when we were empty and they blew up one of our restaurants.
Oh, you're kidding.
So what we did is we sold our interests in Moscow to our Moscow partner and got the heck out of there because we did not want to contend with that. That was just, And then I went to India, and I'm sitting with my India franchisee, also with Baskin-Robbins, meeting, Ryan. And in the middle of his meeting, a gentleman comes in the office. He pulls out a big stack of cash, and he hands it to this guy, and the guy walks out. And so I asked him, I said, do you mind if I ask you what that was for? He said, yeah, we have to pay front money just to get a site consideration in India. And again, that's illegal for the U.S. to do that. So that's how I encountered the Foreign Corrupt Practices.
Yeah, as I said, I'm sure the companies I've worked for dealt with that in various capacities, but yeah, I've never had any dealings with that.
So anyway, you moved from LPL to General Atomics. What was your main attraction to going to General Atomics?
I knew a few people there. I'd always heard good things about the company, and I went and interviewed with everyone and felt that I could make an impact there. The department that I was in was going to be growing, and the company was doing really well, and so it was close to home, and the benefits were really good. So there were a lot of things that are attractive about it. Still to this day, I appreciate most of these same things, if not all. Still working there.
Now, how long have you been there?
For over 4 years now.
For over 4 years, and going from LPL, which you said had evolved to a pretty professional organization. Did you find that when you went to General Atomics, it was already in that professional organization mode?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, we definitely, absolutely. It's the defense industry is a lot different than financial services. So there are just some things unique to the defense industry in that it's more male dominated. I think we're definitely taking our steps to have more diversity and inclusion. That's a big topic at our company now. So those are some things that we're looking at. But I think indicative of engineering and in the defense industry, it's very male dominated. It's a lot of ex-military. None of that should surprise anybody,
Right.
because we need their expertise. A lot of the ex-military are the people that run our company, and we need their expertise. So but that's also one of the very great things that I like about the company is that we do have a lot of outreach to veterans. We employ thousands of veterans.
Okay.
In San Diego and other places, around the world. But that's been a lot of fun. I've been involved in a lot of the veteran outreach and hiring of veterans, and that's something I'm definitely passionate about.
Well, now as the military's kind of welcomed women into their, different arenas, in Navy, Army, whatever, are you finding more women are able to fill the roles that you're looking for now in the future?
I mean, not so many coming directly from the military at like the officer level,
Right.
but more so coming up the engineering ranks. So they obviously studied engineering in school, got a job in engineering somewhere or at GA, and are kind of working their way up, the ranks at GA through engineering and that part of the business. Not necessarily coming directly to us at the officer level from the military, but we definitely do hire a lot of veteran women, but not necessarily into executive roles.
Gotcha. Because my understanding is on the engineering side that there are more women graduating with engineering degrees now than there are men.
Yeah,
is that right?
And having gone to a lot of different job fairs, whether it be UCSD or Georgia Tech, it's if it's not an even split, it's probably more weighted in women, and that's a good thing. It's that in itself is going to diversify, many companies' workplaces. Engineering just has always been such a male-driven occupation, but that's definitely changing, and so we're seeing that as well. I would say we probably hire half. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it wouldn't surprise me if half of the new college grads into engineering were women. That wouldn't surprise me.
Interesting. Now, a curious question, and this is just off the cuff. Do you find that there's a difference in terms of skill sets or behaviors or anything in recruiting a female engineer versus a male engineer? Do you notice any differences?
Not really. Not really.
Okay.
No, I mean, a lot of them get involved in the same sort of college activities. There's engineering clubs where they're either building rockets or cars or
right.
Off-road vehicles or what have you. So there's a lot of the college clubs. Sometimes it's even UAVs or remotely piloted aircraft or what have you. But I noticed a lot of the same passion and types of engineering activities are similar.
Yeah, because in some functions there's an indication, studies have been done that the women coming into the workforce today that are being acknowledged have a soft skill set that's better than us males, and they have more of what's called the emotional quotient, and therefore they deal with conflict and stuff in a very different way than a male would. And I'll use myself as an example. I'm a very confrontational guy. And most women today would not take the same approach to solving a problem that I would take. They'd be a lot more soft-skilled about it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I haven't seen any data on that, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are the things that you think General Atomics excels in terms of the workplace? Well, what would you say really differentiates them?
I would say, stability, being, one of the largest private employers in San Diego County, that has some notoriety.
How many employees did they have?
In San Diego, we've got over 10,000.
In San Diego alone?
Yeah, in San Diego.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty big, or just about 10,000, somewhere around there. More than that, it's got to be close to 11,000, I think. But between a couple different companies, couple different divisions, but just being, one of the largest manufacturers in town, being the largest aerospace company in town, that brings a lot of notoriety. So
Right.
we get a lot of people that want to work at the company, and a lot of referrals from, our employees referring, their, friends and colleagues into the company. So it goes a long way. It makes my job easier, going out and recruiting for our company, because people are pretty familiar with who we are.
Right.
It's over the years, it's become, a pretty common and I would say household name, among employers in San Diego, especially in engineering, manufacturing, defense, aerospace.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
I know a organization that I work with called SCORE that helps small businesses. They gave us a tour. They arranged a tour of your facility, and it was super impressive.
Yeah.
Here's a manufacturing company that literally is as clean as you can find it. And, literally you talk about eating off the floor. I've never seen manufacturing facilities quite as clean as your place is there.
Yeah. It's ISO certified and world class. No question about it. So yeah.
That's great. What I want to look at the future a little bit, if you can, and
Sure.
I'm not going to hold you accountable for your forecast, okay?
Okay.
This is just your best estimate. What do you think? And I think the pandemic's driving my thought process. The pandemic has caused a lot of changes in what's going on in the last 6 or 7 months in the workplace. Some of which may stick, and some of which may allow us to go back to the way it was before. But given what's going on in the pandemic and looking forward, what kind of changes in the workplace do you think are going to happen that would affect college kids that are coming into the workforce over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, clearly, I think a lot more people are going to be working from home remotely. Companies just aren't going to spend the type of money on facilities where they can cut that out. They will. If they can prove that people have been productive working from home, I think they're going to, because it's an enormous savings. And I think about my company in particular. My company is very traditional in that they want people collaborating, whiteboarding, sitting around the conference table, coming up with ideas.
Right.
And if we get the sense, our leadership gets the sense that was we were just as productive in that area working remotely, then it would be a big savings to our company to cut out some of the real estate investment,
Right.
facilities investment. So I think other companies are probably looking at that the same way. I think there's going to be a lot less socializing in the offices. People are going to be a lot more hesitant to just, invade your space,
Right.
come stand in your cube. I just think, with a lot of the personal connection is going to be different. It's not going to be as much face to face and sitting in conference rooms for long hours together until we really have this thing eradicated.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, so those are some things. But again, I mean, the technology that's been developed and perfected in the last year, or even, more so last 7-8 months, the Zooms and the Microsoft Teams and the WebExes, I mean, they've all had to upgrade their technology to just handle more customers, and
Right.
it's taking up more bandwidth. So they've got to become more efficient. And so, I think about all that and how that's impacted the business. And, I think you're just going to see a continued increase in companies innovating in remote workers and remote technology and giving us the tools we need to be successful working from home. So, what we're using now will look completely different in 10 years.
Right. Right.
It's
Well,
going to be more, it'll be more efficient and better.
Right. I think your real estate play there is a big one too, because if you let's just look at the La Jolla UTC area and all those high rises. During the pandemic, more than 50% of them are unoccupied.
Yep.
There's nobody there. They're all at home.
Yeah.
My daughter, who I think I told you, my daughter works at LPL. They sent everybody home. She has to go in because she works for one of the managing directors, and he wants her there. He doesn't believe in remote working.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay. I mean, if she's comfortable with it, I just hope for everyone's health. I mean, obviously our manufacturing team has to be in the offices. They have to be in the plant. They can't manufacture airplanes from home. So they're in there, but there's a lot of protocols now. I mean, they're taking everyone's temperatures and they're just begging and pleading, like, please, social distance, when you're out of work and on the weekends, and, be careful because, you don't want to come in and infect your coworker. There's a lot of that type of literature around. I don't want to use the word propaganda, but really asking people to be careful because, you might be fine and your coworker might be fine, but their grandmother, could become ill and it could be detrimental to, that person's health. So they're just washing of hands and wearing masks and even, face guards and all that stuff is what our manufacturing team is doing to keep each other safe.
Gotcha. One of the things that you pointed out earlier about what happened at LPL, and you said happened to a lot of other companies, is this outsourcing. Well, if we can do work remote, will that in fact drive more companies to think about outsourcing to lower cost environments? If it can be done remotely, it implies to me that it can be done anywhere remotely.
Well,
That's a question.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think the appeal of outsourcing is losing its lust, if you will.
Okay.
I just don't. I think a lot of companies have decided they don't want to go down that road. It's very impersonal. There's certain occupations where it makes sense to do that, and that might always happen. But I think companies still believe in having an employee and a more dedicated worker. Somebody that's got more ownership, takes more pride. At least this is what I'm hoping. Maybe it's me being overly optimistic, but I don't see this as a trend in that. What I do see this doing is fueling a trend of people leaving more expensive places to live and moving to the countryside in Texas or North Dakota or wherever.
Right.
If you can work remotely and you can get good internet, why would you live somewhere expensive with more congestion and more pollution when you could live anywhere else? So I think I know a few people already, not from GA, but friends that work that have been told you're going to be working remotely from now on that are now moving out of state. They're moving to Nevada, Arizona. If they don't have to live here, they're not going to, just due to the cost of living. So I think we'll see more of that, but I don't see a trend in outsourcing coming from this.
Okay.
Yeah, at least at GA. I mean, at my company, most jobs require citizenship. Almost all the jobs require citizenship. So, I mean, if there's an expat that has citizenship that's living in the Cayman Islands or something, I mean, I suppose there's always outliers, but I don't see that being a trend at my company. I'm really hoping that doesn't become a trend with other companies, because that really is an economy killer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you.
Yeah, we've been doing it for so many years, but that's highly detrimental to our economy and the morale of the American worker. And I've never been a big fan of that. But
yeah, I've got one final area I'd like to explore with you.
Sure.
There's been a big discussion, in the last 7 months in particular, about equal employment opportunities for all, whether it's the LGBT community or Black lives or people of color. What do you think it's going to take? And this is kind of you hypothesizing. What do you think it's going to take for us to see that kind of change in our workplace, that all people feel they have an equal opportunity to get a good job?
Yeah, I mean, more diverse people in companies, more people, diverse people in positions of leadership. More outreach to diverse communities. Branding in diverse communities, all that stuff. So it's going to take a massive effort, but it starts with, the tone has to be set at the top of the company. It can't come from the bottom up. So, and a lot of companies are implementing board members, that are diverse, or whether it's, executive team members, or, expanding businesses into, diverse communities, whatever it is. Branding in diverse communities, all those things have to happen. So we're starting to see more and more of that. That's going to be a big initiative for every company of size. I suppose even small companies, but having worked for companies of size, over the last, 10 years, being thousands and thousands of employees, that's going to be continue to be a hot topic.
Is it a hot topic at GA?
It is, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Again, we've got a diverse employee population in certain parts of the company, but we could do a better job. We know that we haven't reached any kind of goal there. We've got some more work to be done there, and I think we're looking at the challenge and are excited about it.
Okay,
so yeah. So, but again, it's going to take all those things. It's just, we have to, I think, more funding has to be made available to, students that don't have access to it, and more economic opportunity has to be extended to people that want to open businesses. Again, we've got to stop, the financial industry, for years has sort of redlined areas that aren't as economically prosperous. All that has to change. You've got to, so it's a big thing, a systematic change that is, occurring, I think.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you just hit on is that we have them here in San Diego and elsewhere in the U.S. It's called an economic development community, where special funds are allocated for small businesses that want to start up, and they get favorable tax treatment for those startups in those economic development communities. The problem is convincing the folks that are in that community that it's a safe place to go for those, as opposed to they're always concerned, well, wait a minute, there must be some motivation on the other party's part that wants to help us. So it's kind of a two-way communication. But I think more and more we're seeing, and I work with the Small Business Administration in this capacity, we're really helping a lot of people, women in particular, get their businesses started, and it's quite successful, at least here in San Diego. So I think right on.
Yeah, you're going to see more of that too. There's talk in the state legislature about reparations, and they've put together a task team in California to look at reparations. And I don't think it's going to be what people's initial reaction is, and it's just cutting checks to people, that may have been, descendants of slavery. I think it's going to be more of, educational opportunities, economic opportunities, but more than what we've seen, maybe 5 or 10-fold, just very clear and easier paths to that kind of economic support. I think that's probably what you're going to see if it were to ever, transpire. But again, I think that's going to bring, great prosperity for everybody.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, and I'll close with this real quick comment, that I'm learning is I've talked to people who conducted business in foreign countries and came here. And one of the things they said is, one of the guys, a personal friend of mine, came from Argentina. He says, we don't have diversity issues in Argentina. We just don't have it. And I never thought of it that way. And then I looked at the history of the U.S. and all the things, and we are still the major melting pot for the world. And I think that's one of our challenges, is we are a melting pot. And so we're probably the most diverse country in the world, but we don't present equal opportunities to that diverse population.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know a lot about Argentina, but I know Mexico's got its issues with kind of what they're viewed as a ruling class, and,
right.
and the disparity between the wealthy and the poor in Mexico is way worse than ours.
Yeah.
And so and again, I don't know much about Argentina, but that's another country that, had, significant indigenous populations. It was settled by Germans and Italians, much in the way
right.
that, and obviously the Spanish. And so, I don't know if I believe that they just don't have an issue with it. I mean, I don't know that person's background, but I'm sure you could find someone in Argentina that said they did have an issue with it. So it might not be the front page of the news, like ours
right.
is,
like
right
it is
now.
here. Yeah,
like it is here. But I know they've got those issues in Brazil, Colombia, and I have places where I do know, people from those countries, and they've said, oh yeah, it's a big issue there. And so they're always trying to find ways to, improve, just the, just the quality of life for everybody in the country. So,
right.
Which is what we're trying to do here.
Well, I think what you pointed out might be the real issue, is that it's not as visible in the press as it is here.
Yeah.
that could be.
Well, that's
that,
absolutely right. No, I mean, ours, you know, people look at it, but that's because they, you know, around the world, people look at America as the land of opportunity. And it's just, I think a lot of people are saddened to see, the issues that we're having in our country. I think a lot of people are disappointed by it because,
yeah.
We're supposed to be the place where people of any color and any creed and, religion can come and have a better life. And when people, around the world see, the George Floyd, situation, on their news, I think they're just shocked that we're having, systemic issues like that here. Or just, whether you believe it's systemic or not, it's definitely recurring. So however you want to chop it up, but I think people are saddened to see that, including, myself,
right.
Cause
one of the reasons I bring it up is the class that I'm teaching, only international students. And so my intent was to awaken them to the fact that we're not everything you thought we were.
Yeah. I mean, it's
not necessarily in a negative light, but there's lots of opportunities, but it hasn't always been for everybody.
No, that's true. But I mean, all of the negative things aside, I mean, I'd still rather live here than anywhere. And I'm, proud to be a citizen of the country, but we've got work to do. There's some things that have to get better, and I believe that we're going to get better.
Absolutely.
I'll never say that this is, the end of our evolution or, the end of our progress. I mean, it might seem bleak at times, but I know that there's more people that care than don't.
Absolutely.
And so I think, I remain optimistic.
Yeah. And I think that's the only way to be about it, Ryan, frankly, is to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time, Ryan. It was a real pleasure to get to talk to you.
Yeah.
Know a little bit about your background in the work environment. I really appreciate it. I know the students are going to enjoy seeing this interview.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure.